This is Amiable Arguments.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Luca, and welcome back to another episode of Amiable Arguments. Like a previous one, I'm actually in studio with my guests this time, so you'll be pleased to hear that we shouldn't have any sorts of problems with audio clarity, unless, of course, my guests turn out to be quite meek, which, present company accepted, I don't think's going to be a problem. So, without further ado...
Nice toast earlier, actually. Nice spread of butter on there.
Excellent. Right. I can already hear the subscribers unsubscribing, Jack. Thank you. No, I'm here today, ladies and gentlemen, with two friends, JP and Jack.
Hello.
Hello. So JP.
Hello, yes. So thanks so much, firstly, for having me here, man. And to
That's right. You're a lucky person.
Thank you. And kind of speak a little bit about, about the music industry, which I'm actually really excited about, because this is a field that I know quite well, actually. So, yeah, thanks, man.
That's all right. And Jack, you're here to commentate and pundit and say interesting things on the way.
I guess just see where it goes. I've been saying I'll do one of these podcasts for about a year or so, and I still haven't, because I couldn't make my mind up what I wanted to talk about. So who knows? Maybe I'll talk about something today.
Fantastic. So, JP, you actually work in the music industry.
I do, yes. I actually have a management company, and I started a long time ago. When I was like 17 or something, I ended up going on tour with bands and artists and just like filming the behind the scenes and filming them in their elements. And I kind of wanted to be an artist, funny enough, when I was younger.
Okay.
Realized very quickly I cannot sing to save my life. So do
you want to sing into the microphone now?
I mean, I don't want to make everybody unsubscribe just yet.
It's a no from him.
It's a no from me.
Okay, fantastic. I thought it might be a bit fun, actually, though, just before we started, like the really meaty stuff about the music industry, to just sort of go around and talk about the music we like and the sort of stuff that, grabs us. I mean, I've been slaving away setting this studio up, getting all the chairs in, turning the laptop on, getting the audio set up. And whilst the boys, that's a joke, they've done it. I've been playing games. But whilst they've been downstairs, they've been listening to Nirvana.
Yes.
So that's a pretty great band.
I mean, you know what? Like, Nirvana really changed the game, and I rediscovered them again. After watching the new Batman, it made its debut. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a band that many youths grew up listening to. What about you, Jack? You were vibing with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a classic, isn't it? Really, everyone knows it. It's. I'm looking forward to the film as well.
Yeah, me too. And you know what? Like, it's really interesting that you bring up Nirvana, because both Nirvana and Linkin Park, and that they kind of share a little bit of a similarity in terms of the music industry and the story, and their sort of introduction into it. And prime example is mental health is a massive thing that's still making its way known within the music industry.
Sure.
And it's something which I think a lot of artists, a lot of creators, but also managers should actually be aware of, and actually not be afraid to speak their mind. I mean, I've kind of been part of my own struggles, but nevertheless, building a great support around me, really allowing me to sort of lean on. But there's been many artists such as Kurt and Chester, who unfortunately have been victims to mental health, and it's something that I think it's just something that especially for listeners, should be aware of, that artists do take a lot of stress and pressure on them.
Well, I suppose when you've got that many people listening to you, a bit like this podcast, really.
Yes.
No, but what I was going to say is that the mental health thing of artists and singers is fairly... I mean, the two just go together, don't they? When you think of singers at this point, you think of the... I know it all sounds quite artsy-fartsy, but it's very true. You think of the struggle,
Absolutely.
And you think of the pain, you think of the mental endurance and the stress. And, I mean, it's pretty well... I mean, there was quite a successful film, sort of, wasn't there, the other year, after they'd remade it for the 68th time or whatever it was, but that A Star Is Born.
Yes.
and that was a fantastic film.
A
Really.
fantastic cast as
It
well.
was actually.
you know.
I was surprised because I never really fancied Lady Gaga. I mean, I liked her kind of jazz stuff before she got super popular and stuff, but I wasn't expecting much from that film. And I thought, you know, what a fascinating like actor and what
Very
an
diverse.
amazing story to tell. You know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the part's tailored for her.
Yeah,
You know, in a way,
110%, 110%. But that's a you know, another prime example of artists, you know, needing a sort of outlet, and that's why they write and produce and, you know, be creative.
The drive to create.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like
Yes.
you know, to create emotions through a sort of tangible sound, I guess you can say, is something which is an art form and something not a lot of people, especially over the years, has appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Jack, go on. Spitball me some of your favourite things to listen to.
Okay. So I guess Pink Floyd is definitely up there.
Oh, love a bit.
I love a lot of classical music. I love my grime. I love my UK hip hop. Yeah, I largely grew up on UK hip hop actually.
Really?
Sort of, yeah. The more kind of underground, not particularly popular stuff that was, you know, maybe more prevalent in the 90s. Yeah, I love all that kind of stuff. Heavy metal. You know, your Elephant Tree or your prog metal. That's, you know, anything I like.
I'm lost now.
With music. yeah. I won't go on about it because it's niche. But
No, that's all right.
I'm an all rounder.
We celebrate niches on this podcast, but
Yeah.
just not. I'll temper that. You know what I mean. Anyway, right?
What about you? What sort of music do you listen to?
Well, I listen to all sorts. I'm not so much. I love all the genres. I really do. I mean, I have favourite singers. I have, you know, Morrissey and the Smiths. I love Stevie
Yeah.
Wonder.
Oh, I love
Motown. I absolutely. I love, of course, the Stones, Led Zeppelin, all of your sort of ones that have stood the test of time and have the longevity behind them. You can basically guarantee that I'll really enjoy. Partly, though, I'm not very clued in on the contemporary stuff.
That's kind of where I come in.
And this is where you come in. This is where you come in, because I need you to persuade me that it's worth a chance and that it's, you know, that there's some really good stuff out there. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know it all, because the fact of the matter is I barely listen to any of it. So it's quite disingenuous and unfair of me to say that I don't like it. But whenever I do hear the modern charts, it just all sounds like the same manufactured pop crap, you know, so...
So I can kind of shed a little bit of light on this. I mean, yes, over the years, when something becomes really popular, it becomes popular, you know, pop music. So if you think about it, you know, let's say The Weeknd, at the time when he first released, you know, his first couple of singles, he wasn't considered pop, you know. Yeah, he wasn't considered as a pop artist or a superstar in that form. However, over the years and the growth of consumption, you know, Spotify, DSPs and that, you know, that grew it to the point where music is so easily consumed, and a lot of people do discard pop artists and acts and the music for it. But if you look at from a perspective that the recording industry is actually not that old, actually, and it's an industry that's still growing and still evolving over time.
So when you say the recording industry, do you just mean the recording of sounds, or do you specifically mean like record labels and things like that?
Record labels are still, you know, I mean, they've been around for a while, but I think the sort of early record labels kind of were formed in like the 1930s or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you really think about it, the sort of mass production of recorded music wasn't so popular when it first came out. People weren't able to buy it. You know, it was really, really expensive. But over time, obviously, you know, mass productions and even the invention of the press, you know, that really allowed things to be mass produced, and that's,
of course, yes,
and that's why, you know, music now is so easily consumed, because we've evolved from you know, pressing sheet music, you know, to now being able to take out your phones and press a button and listen to music.
Yes, and well, I actually so my dad has an enormous collection of vinyls
Love
that were
vinyls.
passed down by his dad, and obviously he's expanded the collection himself, and I in turn have done my duty and expanded it too. But there's something really nice about that generational passing down of music, and also it's just really nice to see vinyl coming back
It is.
into the fold.
And especially with films like what's that film that Chris Pratt in? Guardians of the Galaxy.
Love those soundtracks.
But you know what? Like they have a comeback now, and
Yes.
because of that, sort of tape recordings, and vinyls and old music has, I guess you can say, has made a comeback. And sort of going back on what you were saying about contemporary music, if you take in consideration that this whole music industry is based and run off of hits, and our industry as well is also based on two things: IP and copyright. And those you take is no music.
And what's IP?
So intellectual property.
Oh, right, sure.
So yes,
That's the thing that all the musicians sue each other over
Pretty-
all the
pretty
time,
much.
every day for the
pretty
rest
much
of their lives.
IP,
yes.
copyright. Prime example of like Ed Sheeran most recently was in court because he was getting sued of a particular.
Oh, I thought it was because he was ginger.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, it was
yeah,
actually.
we'll have to edit that out. That's pretty offensive, actually.
You're not happy. Not a happy Jackie.
Not a happy Jackie.
Not
But
happy.
yeah, people like Ed Sheeran, who's obviously now is very, very popular.
Sure.
And everyone's like, oh, it's Ed again. Everything that he makes or releases is bound to be a hit. But that's by accident. It takes a lot of grime, a lot of effort. There's a lot of older people that are stuck in bowls, and they rely on the youths to navigate. And if you think about new platforms like TikTok, which is a massive music discovery tool now that's been used, but prior beforehand, you had YouTube, you had Vine, you had different platforms that you're allowed to discover music, and more now than ever, you're able to discover even more. But going back to TikTok, the reason why TikTok songs now are so popular and enter the charts is because it's that hook. It's that you have a minute or something.
Oh, I don't know. I don't use it.
I mean, it's really interesting because that hook, that little small little bit, if it's good enough and it starts to create a trend, it will begin to start climbing, and eventually people go and consume the products and
Right.
and be interested. But going back to the contemporary side of things, I mean, I know that you mentioned you don't really listen to a lot of that because it's not really your the appeal to you. What is
It's
it?
because I was born in 1920. Nothing else. Jack, what about you though? Like, do you like the contemporary stuff? Do you like anything you hear?
Mostly not. I mean, going back to like the 80s, the 90s, I quite enjoyed what was in the charts, quite a lot of it. But no, I mean, I've given it a chance. I've tried to listen to a lot of it, but yeah, chart music's just never
Not
done
your
it for
thing.
me. Never done it for me.
So I can kind of break down a little bit of why chart music is so prominent, especially for artists, because if you think about it, when an artist signs to a record label, people see that and they're like, oh my gosh, they're rich, but it's not the case at all. It's the moment you put pen to paper, you get an advance usually, and from that advance, let's say it's 250,000, all right. Pounds, dollars, whatever, the conversion rate you want to work in. But from that goes towards the artists and their living. They have to pay for the recording. They have to pay for the sort of the producers, the legal fees, like things that has to come out of that as well as living. But then once that is done, let's say that album or EP or whatever the case is, then they take it to the label. Then the label will additionally put on additional prices. So, for example, like the label will spend like 350,000, pounds, dollars into the promotion side of things.
The marketing and
the marketing,
putting the posters on the sides of the
not
buses.
only that, but nowadays you have to sort of invest in the digital side, because TikTok now is a massive thing, and there's a department of influencers now that they actually work with.
Yes, okay, that makes sense.
So it's even more expensive. So and then on top of that as well, you also have the physical distribution of that. So sometimes now in the contracts, sort of as things were moving into the digital world, they had a clause in there which they actually charged the artist based upon the sort of digital uploads. It's like usually you'll pay for a record to be pressed or something like that.
Yeah.
They actually would charge the artist for just uploading. By the time you get to add everything up from tour supports, you have to go onto the everything like that. You're owing the record company like $2 million by the end of that, and then what they do is they'll sign you or give you another advance, and you have to keep trying to pay that back and pay that back and pay that back. So when it comes down to it, you kind of get locked in a sort of lifelong relationship that often not most artists can't break out of. So that's why when you listen to contemporary music and that, a lot of it's very catchy, a lot of it sounds very manufactured, because they have to pay so much money back to the label. But before the artist even gets the money, you have the lawyer fees, you have the distribution cut that take. The record labels sometimes take between 60 to 80% of your recording, and then on top of that, your publishing. If you get an advance with publishing as well, you have to pay that back, simultaneously. And then if you get booked on shows, you still have to obviously pay the promoter will obviously fund it up. But if you don't have one, you have to pay for your live team. You have to pay for the merchandise. Everything costs, and it's so much money that has to be paid back before the artist even gets it. And that's not even touching the tip of the iceberg on how much money artist has to pay back.
So this sounds to me, Jack, what do you think of this? Because it sounds like you're a creative, and from a creative standpoint, it, as JP describes it, it sounds almost as if the artists are being held prisoner by a company, but also there is an impetus that isn't a creative one in order to put a creative work out, whereas obviously the best conditions for an actor or a writer or a lyricist is to obviously have the idea.
Look, often the more money that's plugged into something, the less creative it's going to become. Potentially, not always. I mean, let's take a West End musical, for example. It can get millions and millions and millions put at it, right? So you've got a huge set, you've got the best choreographer, you've got a huge cast, you've got wonderful MD, a whole pit band, But then what's left, ultimately, when it comes to a musical, you want the acting to be stellar, right? As a foundation, obviously. But then what happens is that you try and make everything perfect because you've got all of this money, and suddenly, what you would think as being an amazing production can actually become incredibly stale because it's got too much money for its own good, right? So then I think that's kind of relatable in the music industry because, again, there's so much money involved that there's not as much artistic license. You can't take as many risks, because if you take the risks and it doesn't pay off, then you're going to have to pay for it. So a lot of these risks that bands, that artists, that actors, whatever, will like to take, the more money that's put into it, the less risk you can take because you're liable for that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like the way I kind of see it is, I've always referred to pop music as almost being fast food music. It has to be churned out quickly. So, for example, JP's talked about some of his artists have to do 800 demos in a year or something crazy, because if they're not keeping it up, if they're not churning that wheel, then they're not making results. They're not getting. They're not trying to find that catch, that hook. You're talking about how you've got to grab your listener immediately.
But yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, there's another thing that comes down to being an artist is obviously the big part of it is the brand. And nowadays, the consumption of music has moved away from, buying albums and CDs. They're more focused on singles. And yes, I do agree there is a very sort of almost like the sort of tail of that, can definitely vary. However, when you do think of music production today, what you hear like overall,
Yes.
it sounds very generic and sounds very sort of the same. However, if you really take the time to listen to the production elements of it or the creativity elements of it, for example, Dua Lipa, like she is a prime example of taking a sound that obviously was quite popular back in like the 80s and 90s and that, and making it more modern. But then you also look at The Weeknd as well, doing the same thing. But then the sort of ingenuity of that, and the fact that technology has allowed evolvement of new sounds and new sort of new experiences. It has actually opened up the world to creators, and having digital draws as allowing people to be more creative than ever. Whereas beforehand you just had a physical recording studio, where now you can just have a laptop and that's it.
Maybe I'll make an album next, folks.
You could.
Get it started in here. Yeah.
No, I definitely will. Because I have two examples in my head of one band where I feel like they started out immensely creative with a very singular voice, and then sort of devolved into doing just like everybody else. And then I also have a band in my head that started very much good, but following the prejudices of the time, and then found and discovered within themselves something really unique. And in the case of the band that started somewhat generically, that band is, I don't know if you know Talk Talk from the 1980s. Because they started out, their first few albums are good albums, but they're following the new wave genre, and they're trying to be a Duran Duran and an Aha. And then when you listen to the later stuff, those last albums like Spirit of Eden and Colour of Spring are just absolutely incredible. They're some of the most experimental albums that I've ever heard. And then conversely, the one that I sort of thought started really interesting, and then by the end, I'm just thinking this isn't worth listening to, is actually Coldplay.
Really?
Yeah.
Elaborate. Because I'm really interested to hear both your thoughts on this, actually.
Well, I'll just follow the point through briefly, and then I'll let Jack take over with the commentary. But I just thought that when they had that first album, Parachutes, and it's poppy, but particularly I think Rush of Blood to the Head, that entire album with The Scientist and Rush of Blood to the Head and In My Place and Wine and Amsterdam, it's a heck of an album. And you listen to it and you think that only Coldplay made that. There isn't a comparison. It's their album, it's their sound. But then I feel like as soon as you get to the later stuff, it's just they bring in all the synths and the poppy sounds, and it just sounds like Chris Martin singing over generic pop song 58. What do you think, Jack?
Well, yeah, I mean, that happens so often, doesn't it? That a band you grow to love and, you might even grow up with, suddenly that band changes into something very different and almost unrecognizable in some cases. And again, I think it's the money that's put into it. But, you might start off, a band might start off in like a garage, and that's when it forms that little seed, which is its style, and then suddenly, when you end up getting popular, you've got to remain popular. And so that's when people get involved and say, hey, I like what you're doing, but maybe we could tweak this. Maybe we could add this. Maybe we could get some backing singers. Hey, maybe we could even add some more artists or whatever, or take away artists. There's been times in the past where people have been told to let go members of their band, because they've been seen to not necessarily represent the band's interest, There can be a lot of manipulation that goes on that takes away from the integrity of the band, what they initially have, and it's then kind of molded to try and become this popular machine. It just seems like a kind of natural evolution or devolution of music, I guess.
Just speaking about, what you're saying there, like, yeah, absolutely. Like over time, the music industry, especially with things that are trends, and that obviously people want to stay on top of the trends. Like the music industry, like I said, is run on hits, and it's the fangirls that really sort of hone this in. But talking about Coldplay, yes, they did start off with this amazing, like The Scientist, and people like albums like that, which was absolutely beautiful. But the thing is, they actually had the time to do it, because when you think about it, you release an album, or a project, and then you do the promo, and then from the promo you go on a world tour, and sometimes your world tour can last up to like 1.5 to sometimes 2 years, and then by that time you have to go back in and start writing another load. But then obviously there's more money that gets thrown at you. There's more higher risk that gets put into it, and there's more demand for them to obviously sell. So you're not allowed to really kind of have that space for creativity that much anymore, which it is a shame. But at the same time is you do have these artists like Coldplay who has branched out into different directions, and not everything that they put out is a hit, but you know what, like songs like Adventure of a Lifetime, they're really awesome. And also the Ghost album as well, I believe it's called. That album is also one of my personal favorites, because when they weren't doing the touring circuit, they were allowed to go back in and actually be creative again, and sort of be experimental, and experimental with sounds. And that's why bands like Queen, when they first came out, with the Bohemian Rhapsody album, phenomenal. But because they went in to experiment and find new sounds, the same with Pink Floyd and many other artists, is back then there was a lot more time to be experimental, because there wasn't so much of the digital age. There wasn't so much of our nowadays, like our attention span is so shortened.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Exactly.
It's just a bad joke. Unsubscribe.
No, I mean, our own attention spans has shortened, and that's due to over time of how demand we expect things, and how like we expect our phones, our laptops to be like at a drop of a hat. And the moment like you click something, you see the spinning ball of death, you're like, oh my gosh, I need to upgrade. It's things like that has been sort of planted in your mind, that you expect to have things quick. And that's why pop music now is a lot more, like you said, like fast food, is because we're expecting to have quick things. And that's why fast food is such a popular mean of consumption for both for both people who love it and people who make it. It is quick money, but that's because of our consumers. And does that kind of answer that question of why that sort of side of music does kind of dip a bit?
It definitely does. And obviously, when I say all of this, I'm not one of those people. I'm not there like, oh, Coldplay should just pack it in. They should go home. They can't do it anymore. Dude, if they want to keep making music and people keep wanting to listen to it, that's good enough for me.
Exactly.
Honestly, and the way I always approach anything like this is that I'm just grateful to bands and singers for putting out something that I do like. I don't have to like it all, but if I find, even if it's a band that does a one-hit wonder, like New Radical, You Only Get What You Give, that is such a great song, and it's the only one that anyone ever knows them for, and it's just such a feel-good song, and that's great, and I see as much value in that, really, as because it's all of us. I say us, it's all musicians together, just putting stuff out there, trying to, and I find a lot of joy in just listening to something for the first time and hoping that it impresses me.
I would definitely say I do agree with you to some degree. I also think that because now we're in the modern era where everything is digital and a lot more easier to manipulate sounds, and that during the 90s when you had like hip hop and all that stuff, remixing and sort of beat making and DJing and all that stuff, that really allowed for a whole new world to be opened up. And that's why through that we have new sounds, we have sort of new new ways of making music, and sometimes old covers or previous songs, kind of make their way back into the modern day light because of either a sort of current artist or a remix of something has sort of been like, oh my gosh, I remember that. Prime example, Mariah Carey, like she did a cover of a song, and everybody thinks it's hers. Same with James Arthur. He did a cover of Impossible, and everyone thinks it's his. Same with Jamie. What's it? Jamie Scott. Is it not Jamie Scott?
Callum
right. Scott. My bad. Callum Scott. He did a cover of I can't remember that song now, but you know which one I'm on about.
No, you're asking the wrong person. Jack, do you know which song he's on about?
No.
Oh, okay. So he did this cover when he was on X Factor, and everyone he did it so well, it became his song in a way. So I definitely would say that through the period of remixes and the hip hop era has really allowed for new music to be created, new genres, and there's a sound palette for everything. And there's something that will.i.am said once in an interview, that if you make something and you put it out there, whether it's 5 people, whether it's 10 people, whether it's 100 people, whether it's 500 people or 1,000 or 1,000,000, someone out there is going to like it. Someone out there, it fits that person
By sheer probability.
By sheer probability. But at the same time is artists like will.i.am who have created new waves and inspired new artists to come up. Michael Jackson, prime example. He set the bar for pop. But then he also created careers such as Justin Bieber and Timberlake. He's inspired.
I think there was something else about Jackson though as well, which was the music video.
Oh, absolutely! Like everybody tuned in to see him do the dance.
Well, there were so many celebrity cameos on those things as well.
Oh yeah, Chris Tucker.
It was cool to be in the Michael Jackson music video. That was but
but it is part of the brand, and that's a really big thing that artists, especially if you're an artist and you are listening to this, you got to focus on your brand, you got to focus on your mission, you got to ask yourself why. Why am I making music? Why am I putting it out there? Who is my market? Who is my target audience? And the pop music that's being released today may not be your appeal. However, there'd probably be like Menskin or people like that who you go listen to because they have their own their own wave, their own sound. It doesn't necessarily have to be your Biebers and your Dua Lipas, but there are some amazing ingenuity and sound development and creativity within those records as well.
Yeah. Let's move on to talk about, because you mentioned something, and I'd be interested to spend a little bit of time on this. So let's talk about, because you mentioned the X Factor. And obviously that's been, as far as that and Pop Idol and The Voice, they've kind of been TV juggernauts.
So
I was going to ask, Jack, have you watched any of these shows? Did you ever?
Oh, a tiny bit. Just for the worst acts I could find.
Oh, you like the audition processes?
Yeah, that was it really. I found the whole thing very embarrassing, and I generally the judges behave in an absolutely abominable way. I mean, I know it's staged, but they also behave in a way that is just completely disrespectful. I've got nothing good to say about those shows.
So you wouldn't turn around for the show, or you wouldn't, no thumbs up, no, just full
no
X.
thumbs up.
No,
just
I can kind of shed a little bit of light on this actually, because this is really interesting that you both bring this up, because shows like X Factor and The Voice and that started off as a sort of platform for A&Rs and to kind of allow artists to be discovered. And it's a really great platform where some artists do really shine through, and some artists obviously are not really artists. But it is part of entertainment, and that's what we've all sort of came to consume as well, is entertainment. That's why we watch it. That's why you search the bad auditions.
Well, I would argue though that's not why we watch it. That's why we did watch it, because if the statistics and the views prove anything, it's that those shows have sort of been on the decline. I mean, hasn't the X Factor stopped? It stopped, hasn't it now?
I believe they have stopped production on it. I think that was before the lovely COVID period, but
Oh, what a lovely period
I know,
that was.
what a lovely
Yes.
period. I discovered, to be honest, I did discover a lot of new music during that period as well. But nevertheless, those sort of platforms, it's because we're always searching for something new, and that's why artists like Billie Eilish, lover, hater. I mean, I'm personally not a consumer of her music, but I can appreciate.
My sister really likes her.
See, I can appreciate her craft because she came in with a different message, a different brand, and from that brand.
By brand, you mean the green hair?
That's part of the brand. There's a lot more than just the visual aspect. It's the messaging, it's what they stand for, what they, who they are, what they bring to the table. If you think about Billie Eilish's music, and if you can give a short description, there's probably people who kind of feel out of place and weird in life, and whatever the case is. But that appeals to that sort of people. Those sort of target audience.
And how much of it do you think is I was jesting with the obviously Billie Eilish's green hair, which she doesn't have anymore. But when someone comes on the scene, like in your experience, how often is it a mathematical, calculated equation to what they're going to wear, what their eye makeup's going to be, what their hairstyle's going to be, what the album, like how much of it feels controlled and like some sort of, well, if we just put this bit here and then we divide that by, or how much feels it organic and just...
That's really interesting you asked me that question, because...
That's because I ask great questions.
You do ask some great questions.
Stop flirting, guys. Just
sorry.
stick
I'm sorry.
to the podcast.
But yeah, so for example, just as I mentioned earlier, The Weeknd, I mentioned him. Before, as he's on his rise, if you take a silhouette and you look at it without even seeing anything else, you would notice that is The Weeknd because of the hair. Same with Bieber, it was the hair, and same with Billie Eilish. She was known to have those green stripes in her hair. It's because those visual appealings, once you kind of get used to it, as you begin to be on the rise, people become familiar with it, and familiarity is the part of what you associate.
Well, yes and no. Do
elaborate.
The fence sitter that I am. Well, I mean, it can be. There can be artists, like, for example, okay, so one that I know well, obviously, being with Morrissey. He's always going to be the guy with the quiff, with the baritone, but he doesn't swing about the flowers anymore. And he doesn't do any of that stuff because he's older and it would look ridiculous now, and he realizes that. But like, when you look at someone, I think a better example is someone like David Bowie, always reinventing himself with every single album.
Absolutely.
People, you couldn't say, oh yeah, I know what David Bowie looks like, because, I mean, yeah, sure, his face, yeah, you know what his face looks like, but the costumes, the Ziggy Stardust, all those different costumes, every album, you never knew what he was going to come out with next.
I'm so glad you brought that up as well, because I can actually shed a little bit more light into that. So as obviously an artist become more popular, a lot more awareness of them as built, you will notice there will become different eras of it, and they will begin obviously evolving and changing, and at that period of time, you begin to start seeing other sides of them come out. The Weeknd, again, when he had that hair, that one stage, the nice little pineapple look, then he cut it short, ish, and now he's having the sort of Afro vibe, going on there. So it continuously evolves, and because of that, they're evolving, and their audience are evolving, and it allows them to become new and to become more appealing, where they begin to start building that awareness or a reattraction again on things.
Jack, what would you say most draws you to a singer, to an artist? What do you look for when you're...
Fuck knows.
And this is now considered explicit on Spotify.
Oh, God damn it.
He says so little, but when he does...
I don't know. I can't think of any singular formula that makes a singer appealing to me, really.
What about when they're in their 70s and they're doing a bit of grime from London?
Oh, yes.
Pete and Baz.
Yes, we're talking Pete and Baz. Maybe we should play a little snippet at the end, a little bit of
We
desert
can't
island.
I can't do that.
Can't,
Yeah.
No, a tiny bit, like 5
Can't
seconds.
copyright.
What?
Yeah, you can't because it's due to copyright issue.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah,
well,
go listen to Pete and Baz, folks. You'll love it.
I mean,
You'll love it.
it just comes back to artistic integrity, really. All the music I listen to, it's as JP said earlier, it's got a vision. That artist knows why they're doing it. It's unique. It's not. I mean, whenever I hear someone that sounds just like another singer, so often I just switch off because I just think, oh, it's just more of that, one of the reasons I think that I listen to such a huge range of music is because I love variety. I mean, people often say, oh, I listen to everything. But I think, do you really, though? Have you really had anywhere near the amount of versatility in terms of... I mean, I'll listen to, like, I don't know, a little bit of Jack Johnson one day, and then the next day I'll be listening to some, pretty strong grime or some like death metal
or maybe some
just,
Ralph Vaughan Williams.
Yeah, or Vaughan Williams. Yeah, I just love variety. I love something that's distinctive, and that is something that I often just find is often thrown out in the pop industry because of autotune. Autotune is my pet peeve when it comes to music. Sometimes it can be used artistically and
like
to make
Cher, Believe.
like
Cher, you know the song Believe. Believe
yeah. I can see that working. Yeah, but sometimes, but more often than not, it's just used because it's just like the thing. It's the style, and it's just taking a while to get rid of that.
I also want to say, based upon what you said there, I do actually listen to a lot of variety, and when people ask me the question, and I say, yeah, I listen to everything because I do, but I also I also work at the O2 as well at AEG, and I absolutely love working there, and through that I've been able to experience like bands like Ghost on Royal Blood. People who I generally wouldn't go and listen to or add to my playlist, but now after having an opportunity to go listen to them and seeing them live, I'm like, oh my gosh, like there is a lot more music out there that I'm still discovering, and I'm still sort of given a chance again.
Well, even because the other night, ladies and gentlemen listening, we went to the O2, a bunch of us together, and JP kindly got some tickets to go see the War of the Worlds. Which is Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, which is his musical version of it from the 1970s. Absolutely fantastic. With a full, I don't know if it wasn't quite an orchestra, but there was not huge amounts of instruments.
There was an ensemble.
Yes, there was a very neat way to put it. There was a huge ensemble, and it was fantastic. I mean, I love the album anyway, but, just that kind of variety as well. And narrative storytelling. I love albums that have a journey, which I suppose was really revolutionised by the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, where, it's an album within an album because it's not the Beatles, it's Sgt. Pepper's. It's the Beatles playing Sgt. Pepper's songs. So it's like the inception of albums.
I love
It's
that.
fantastic.
I love that. What about you, Jack? I mean, I know that we were listening to Nirvana earlier, and obviously that is a fantastic band. What about them? Would you say that sort of appeals to you?
Well, I guess one of the things that really appeals to me is just how raw the vocals is. Like his vocal technique is, it's nothing that a vocal expert would regard as being correct in any manner. I mean, the kind of techniques he was using, if you were to do a gig like that every night, screaming your head off, like, you would lose your voice so quickly. But I suppose it's as I say, it's just how raw it is. I mean, I remember hearing a story about how Nirvana actually, they were in a recording booth, and he started getting really angry and having this rage, and what they did is they actually just kept, they were like, no, keep recording. So he was having this rage, like screaming, and they just went with it, like they just riffed, and that kind of anarchy is it's brilliant. That kind of punk,
Rock side.
yeah, rock, yeah, it's great. That's what I think is so distinctive about Nirvana. It's fascinating that it became so popular.
I suppose people are very captivated by, like, the Sex Pistols and stuff like that. So it did really well commercially. But it was also, I mean, God Save the Queen was banned from the British airwaves. You couldn't play it.
Really?
Yeah, you couldn't play it on the radio at the time. And so, it's funny because when we think, I mean, and I am guilty of perpetuating this, but when I think of modern pop, I think lazy. I think something with nothing to say. And obviously that's not entirely true. But even back then, when you've got the BBC and everything going, oh, can't play that. But there's something cool about the rebellion. And sometimes the rebellion goes even further than what any marketing or calculator ever could. It just punches through this sort of sound barrier.
Exactly, like Youngblood, a prime example. But again, the reason why he works so well, and same with the Sex Pistols and that, is because that's part of the brand. That's part of that audience, the sort of style music and what they sort of promote in an essence, and what they're about. The thing is, when you do have big artists like Drake or Shawn Mendes or Bieber who go and release albums, the singles themselves, yes, they are manufactured to become very hit friendly. However, if you take the time to go and listen to the other stuff that is not hits, that's on the album, the sort of sound palette is a lot more different, because what you hear usually is just the hits. It's just the stuff that gets played. However, the ingenuity and the real creative side of them does come out in the lesser known songs, and that's because that's them being creative again.
I mean, there's nothing better for me than a B-side,
Yeah.
on some albums.
Yeah.
Well, some singles even. And, I mean, in the case of one of my favourite bands, the Smiths, they end up compiling them all. But there are other bands out there where you could just not find these gems. And yet somehow they take on a life of their own. One of my favourite B-sides is Ventura Highway by America. I love that song. And it was a B-side to Horse with No Name. And I just think it's a fantastic record.
I'll definitely say, even though pop music, in general may not be your type that you consume, I would say give a chance and listen to some of the other songs that are not popular, because even so, it's a lot of money that gets put behind these singles that gets ready, because what they are theoretically is promotional songs. And music that is actually the bottom line revenue for artists. Live merchandise and your stuff, that what you attach yourself to, really makes the money. Not so much the music. The music is just part of the mechanics.
It is important to search for music that is up and coming, I think.
Oh, 100%.
I went to see James Acaster do this gig with Tom Seale's big band. It was wonderful. And he was talking about the fact that what he'll do is he will, every year, he'll listen to as many albums as he can from that year. Because the point, even if he doesn't quite enjoy it, because the point is, I mean, I often fall into this trap, as Luke was talking about, listening to Vaughan Williams and Pink Floyd, and all of these artists that are fairly dated now, because that's what I like. And in my bigoted kind of sense, a lot of the time I think, well, that was kind of the sweet spot, that was when music was good. But I think that's a dangerous way to think in a way, because you're almost staying in the past, aren't you? It's important to, however you can, stay up to date at least a little bit. Have a little bit of what you used to listen to, but also in the mix, you want some modern stuff going on. And
Expand
I think
your palette.
yeah,
basically.
yeah, and certainly from my point of view, I mean, I've probably only got about 2 modern albums on the go. And you just miss out on history, don't you? You miss out on the significance of the album at the time.
Well, I suppose it comes down to, like to expand upon your point as well, it's this idea of passing things on to the next generation. And all of the singers out there nowadays, they have someone in the past that they were inspired by. And they were inspired so much that they wanted to get up, walk up to the microphone and try it for themselves.
Exactly.
And in 50 years' time, I don't know if it'll be as much as the old stuff from the 20th century, but people will listen to a Dua Lipa album or something like that, and they'll think, "Yeah, I fancy a go."
Yeah,
And there's
absolutely.
something beautiful in that.
And
Yeah.
it's really amazing that you say it, because yes, these artists like Michael Jackson, who set the bar. There would never be another Michael Jackson. There would never be another Justin Bieber. There would never be another Dua Lipa or The Weeknd or Drake. There would never be another one of those artists. Chris Brown, whoever. Because they are so solidified within our pop culture.
There'll never be another Kanye.
There will honestly will never be another Kanye.
Thank God.
Maybe you'll make an album. But that's the point. Like, you may, what you're referring to is obviously, bands like the Sex Pistols and the Queen and that. There will never be another one of them, but also the style of music and the sound palette that they have. Whereas now, you have those people who's making the history, like you said, right now, because there will never be another one of those again.
Well, there will never be another the moment we're living right now.
No.
Because that's how time works. But it's a nice idea.
And there is a lot of artists out there, a lot of singers that can sing, a lot of creators that can create. But again, what it boils down to is those special ones that come through. Who has the right brand, who has the right message, who puts it out there, are the ones that become those big artists. And from being those big artists, there will never be another one of them. And that's what I'm saying is that it's so special to be part of an upcoming artist's career and seeing them evolve and develop and become the superstars that they are. And that's why you have bands like One Direction when they broke out. That was because of the X Factor, and that's a prime example of artists being discovered, loved by consumers, and the brand from that was so well suited. The fact that each of them had their own personalities, and that shine through, and from then they were able to attach themselves to like Nintendo and people like to appeal to that audience. But because they become so popular and overrated, there's a saying. Would you rather be an artist that's, overpopular and sells out, or would you rather be an artist that is underrated and doesn't sell? Considering how much money has to be made in order to pay back record labels and people that you owe, because being an artist is not easy, and being a band there's a lot more money to be split between. So it's really, really difficult. And that's why I say pop music now is a chance for artists to at least try and make a decent amount from it, where they can begin to start living.
And I suppose once they do make some money from it and they do start to make their living, that greater enhances their freedom to be creative.
Exactly.
Because I think a good example of this is it was George Michael.
Yes.
When he was and he got to the end of things and he just made his own record label. And then you've got complete freedom, to make whatever you want, and that's but it takes a certain amount of money. It takes putting in the legwork to do that sort of thing.
But also, when it comes to the recording industry, it's very monopolized. It's very political. A lot of things what you don't see looking in is there's a lot of people behind, a lot of mechanics, a lot of things that kind of favors. I guess you can say that's why you've heard sort of stories like Weinstein and people like that who's taken advantage of their position and power and that. But even so, there is only a certain amount of record labels that can be bought or owned by the majors, and you have your Sony, your Universal, and your Warner, and even so, they control the majority of the market. And if you look on the charts as well, majority of those even sub labels are owned by the majors, because again, it's about market share, And yes, there is a growth in independent labels, and but there's also a growth of record labels buying independent labels. And same like you say with George Michael, there is still a link.
Jack White would be a better contemporary example as well, who made his
Yeah.
own. I went to his record store in London, yes, and it really got a chuckle out of me actually, because I walked in there expecting to see albums, all the things that had inspired him growing up, his interests, and the whole album was just records by his label. It just really made me laugh. It was just really funny because it totally subverted my expectation.
But then what you don't also sort of think is, yes, people like just referring back to George Michael, those IP and ownerships of those bigger hit songs or of his career is still owned by the record label. So even if George Michael goes and puts on new music,
which he won't,
unfortunately. Wait, he's not. But even so, like, yes, they will still consume new music, but the old music as well will be even more consumed. So it's still a sort of mechanic here that you're continuously fighting.
Well, I can't believe how fast the time's flown, but we're literally coming up to the hour marker. So some sort of last minute comments from you, Jack.
I thought as we can't play any Pete and Baz, I thought I could maybe recite some. So do go ahead and check out Pete and Baz. They're absolutely wonderful. Some of the best rappers around, especially their new stuff, classics. I'll read a little bit. I've had enough of these mugs, rolling them up in a rug. Come round the back of a car. You should have listened when I told you. Do one, do one, do one, do one, do one. You can go do one. Too many dings on the line. Backed off the Bing and I just got a new one. So there we go.
I love that, Jack. Can I just say, you should actually consider becoming an artist. Are you looking for a manager?
No, I wouldn't go that low, mate. I'm looking.
Whoa! Oh wow! Well, Jack got some pretty sassy final comments in there.
He got some hooks in there.
JP, don't retaliate. Be the better man. But just share with the audience some final thoughts.
You know what? I think at the end of the day, we're in a very amazing state within the music scene and industry, and there's a lot of artists, a lot of involvement, and we still got a lot of time to go. We're what, like 150 something odd years in, and it still has a long way to go, and I'm really excited to see the next lot of music that comes out and artists. And I'll definitely say is, don't be so quick to discard the pop acts and the pop music and the contemporary music. I would definitely say give it a chance to really consume it, put it in, and actually listen to the mechanics of it.
All right. Well, I will be amiable, and I will do that. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I would sing you out with a bit of Frank Sinatra my way, but I won't. I'll spare you. So thank you again for listening. I've really enjoyed talking to you both. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I've had it my way.
Lovely. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care.